My name is Paul Strode. I'm a flower essence practitioner and a CranioSacral therapist. I am here to talk about flower essences and take you on a journey into the magical world of flower essences. But to start, if I tell you a little bit about my story. So if we start when I was in my early 20s, I was introduced to a book by Sanya Roman called Open to Channel. And that book gave me all of the tools I needed to be able to work with guides, ask questions, receive answers, healing and even inspiration. So for a long time I've been channeling and working with guides. I never went into the shamanic world. I kept away from that. Probably something to do with my Catholic upbringing. But from there, if we go to my late 20s, my godmother, Elise, my love, from America, introduced me to a beautiful book by Dorothy McLean called To Hear Angels Sing. Dorothy McLean is very much one of the founders of the Findhorn Project in Scotland and is very much one of my icons. And that book, To Hear Angels Sing, was her channeling into trees, into plants, and to communicate with the spirits. So that was my first sort of introduction into the nature spiritual world of healing and communication. Hop, skip and a jump to the late 90s. I was on a workshop in Glastonbury, and in that workshop I was introduced partly to a system through this book called MAP, Medical Assistance Program, that by Michelle Smallwright. Again, another one of my icons, profound book. But within that was my first introduction to essences and how to work with essences, how to work with nature spirits, and particularly conings, which is a aspect that we'll go into later, but is a very poignant point of how I make essences. And so that was my sort of first introduction through this workshop. Jill Patterson and I became friends, and she needed a products manager. She lived down in Devon in a lovely little place called Marystow, west of Dartmoor. And so I moved down there and helped her work with producing these essences. She would make the mother tinctures, which we'll look at later and what they are. And then I would literally just churn out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these bottles. And one day we finished one of the tinctures that was flower essences. There were 3 flowers that were in this little mix. She used it for a spray. And she said to me, do I know anywhere where we can find these flowers? And there was, right at the bottom of the hill where we lived, there was a beautiful place where 2 rivers met. And we went down there and we found these particular flowers that she needed for the essences. And I watched her making the flower essences, and she had this beautiful crystal geode, and she was a little way upriver, and it was such a lovely day. It was so sunny, pouring through onto the water. It was all sparkly. It was just a magical scenario in itself. Anyway, I focused in on what Jill was doing, and after she'd finished, I said, can I give that a go? She said, sure, here, use my crystal geode, which crystal geode is like if you had a ball, a rock, and you cut it in half. We'll look at these later. And then it's crystal in the center. Traditionally, people use glass bowls, but in the crystal essence method, the way I make essences, or the way I was shown, we use crystal geodes. So she let me use her geode, and I looked around me, and there was a bluebell there. And I said, so how do I do this? And she said, well, the conings that we use in the healing program and that you've used in that book MAP, open one of them up and invite, evoke, request the spirit of that plant to come into that space. And so I did. And when I was in that space and in that moment with Bluebell, what I saw was this zipping around energy, like a little firefly zipping around, very excitable, very excited that it was there, as if I'd reached out and made communication with it. It was more excited than I was to be there. And then I started to use the process, which is bending the flower into the water itself. This process, the crystal essence method, is called an uncut essence or a living essence. So that flower itself is still connected to the plant itself, connected to the roots and the area that it's in. a very different type of essence from the traditional ones, which we'll look at later. So as I did that, I found different sensations of my body reacting to what I was doing. I felt my throat chakra starting to really activate and spin. I found that when I closed my eyes and looked with my inner eye, that there was this beautiful indigo blue cloak that came around me, and I felt an almighty sense of peace within that. And very exciting. There was a great excitement and joy that I felt with this communication. So that was my first essence that I made, was beloved Bluebell. Fantastic. And Bluebell has been very much a part of what I've been doing, particularly when it comes to conferences and presentations. Bluebell always wants to have a little look in there. So I thought, okay, shall I give this a go again? Encouraged by that experience that I had with Bluebell, I saw a lovely little yellow flower that I thought was buttercup. I'm not a botanist, right? And I think Jill at the time said, Paul, I don't think that is buttercup. It was actually lesser celandine. There's nothing lesser about lesser celandine, let me tell you. So I again asked the spirit of lesser celandine to come into this sacred space, into this sacred space with me. And I found when the spirit entered into the coning with me, this very focused energy. I became, it's as if I could see this arrow shaft, and I was led along the shaft to the spearhead itself, to the point itself. It was as if connecting with lesser celandine, my energy and focuses were just becoming very pinpoint. And through that symbol, it was trying to communicate that that's what it could help with, and that's what it was good with. I've never made a flower essence before. I never knew about flower essences. So I'm experiencing this thing all a bit freaky to start connecting with these spirits, right? You know, and to hear them and feel them and start to see all this stuff. Particularly, like I was saying, from a Catholic upbringing, you know, this is like, I was starting to feel a little bit scared by this. You know, I'm starting to hear these little whispers becoming a little louder in my head. Well, there was the spirits talking through this process. So I then sort of felt what my body was doing, reacting to it. My first chakra, third chakra and sixth chakra were becoming stronger, as if fortified, as if to encourage me to carry on with this process, though a bit of fear was starting to come up because I'd never experienced the shamanic world. So I sort of took note of that and what Bluebell did and what celandine did. And I looked around, again, just in the vicinity that I was, and there was ramson, or wild garlic. Again, not a botanist, didn't know what it was, but asked for the spirit of ramson to come into that coning. And I had this almighty, again, this is the sort of the inner eye that you see this with, this almighty white shield that was just, it was like white golden fire that was in front of me, that was literally shielding me from the experience of feeling fear. And those feelings that I'd felt before, I felt protected as ramson, or wild garlic, came into that coning. And I started to feel in my body that the energy of wild garlic, or the essence, its medicine, its healing, was cleansing, was sort of clearing out the meridians. It was doing something with my blood. There was something cleansing and purifying as I was doing this. And this almighty white light, this shield, and I felt so protected. And I'm glad, because I was getting a bit scared hearing all these voices, right? So they were the three first essences that I ever experienced and got to know. And that triad gave me a platform to then push out further into experimenting with essences. I've had no formal training. There is no necessary formal training to learn how to make an essence. It seems to be handed down to you. Coupled with these conings, which are like these sort of little conference room, Michelle Smallwright calls them, but gives you this portal, this window, this bridge into the spirit world. Coupled with that and the experiences that I had with the devas, those three devas in the beginning, devas being a Sanskrit word for shining ones, it's a name for spirits. I think that's a beautiful name for to describe the fairies. Actually, in our pre-Christian past, in our pagan past, the fairies were called the shining ones, the wise ones, the gentry. So I think it's quite appropriate to call them divas. So coupled with that and the experience of working with these conings, I ventured out into the great outdoors and started to make essences, ones that I was drawn to. Not any old essences, but seemingly the ones that would seem to be more illuminated as I go for a walk. Ones that I'd maybe seen but not seen, but every time I passed them, they were like glowing. They were in my head. It was like they were stalking me now to try and discover what their essences were. Now, again, like I say, there was no formal training, so I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, what do you do? How do you do? How long do you hold the flower into the water? How many drops do you take? What's the storage aspect of them? All this sort of technical detail. I didn't know who to ask or what to do. So I remember, again, through this work, through Michelle Smallwright's book, Map, that you can program these conings. You can program them for like a protection coning, a communication coning, a flower essence coning. And I was wondering if I could find, and not only can you program them, that there is a diva for everything. So there's, in this beautiful place that we are here now, there's an overlighting diva of this place. There's a diva of these ferns, of the trees. So there's a diva for everything. So was there a diva that could help me make flower essences? And so I asked, and in came this beautiful green orb. Now I know this orb. I see spirits as orbs. Through my channeling and guides, I see them as orbs. And that interface that we all have when we make essences will always be unique for us. The interface is a very important part between ourselves and working with spirits. But how they present themselves to me through the interface that I work with them is orbs of light. And I knew this beautiful green orb. I'd met her, I feel like she's a her. Her name is Avelyn, and I met her in Avelyn. I was house sitting and working with the map book, tuning into guides, and she came and she presented herself as that day as my flower essence making teacher, as it were. Our relationship over the next 3 to 4 years was amazing because I could always go back to her and ask, how do you do? What do you do? If she didn't know, she would then say, go and talk to such. So I'd ask that spirit to come in and say, how do you do this? How do you do that? She was my teacher. I don't have any formal training. I didn't read it from a book. I got it from nature. I got it from the land. And that's what Avelyn taught me, is that when you make essences, particularly when you make them in the way that I do, which is the living essence, the uncut, the flower is still connected to its, like I said before, the plant, its roots, and the location. And Avelyn taught me that actually, if I was to make a primrose essence, it was a primrose essence that day, and there was a whole wood full of them. And I knew I had to make that essence. I had that calling, had the nod, the prompt. But which flower do I choose? So I asked Avelyn, and guided by her, we moved around the wood, and I used my body as a kind of dowsing tool, as well as connecting with her, to find that it was one particular flower in one particular place in that wood, amongst all of the other flowers. So I asked her why was that so poignant just there? And she said it's because there's a power spot just there where that flower is. So what she was showing me is that actually this energy in the land that is so significantly connected to the work that I was doing. And more broadly, what that work was doing was letting me understand the ancestral connection to the land, and particularly of the British Isles. You know, what is our spiritual heritage? You know, what were we doing before them pesky Romans got here? You know, what is our spiritual heritage? And so from that, connecting to the earth, it got me into our old spiritual beliefs. I got introduced to Druidry, the Druid path, of which I've been studying. I've studied through the bardic aspect. I'm now in the ovate aspect, and then the next bit is the Druid. The ovate is very much the healer, the scryer, the seer, the herb lore, the midwifery. the diviner, the person who talked to spirits. And so from working with her and connecting to the earth, I feel like I've discovered our pre-Christian spiritual heritage. And working with flower essences, and particularly in this fairy way, or shining one's way, is a very old traditional path. It's nothing new. This work is nothing new. This is old knowledge, collated by everyone who's living in past experiences, collated in this library of information, and it's in the trees, and it's in the land, and it's in the flowers. So she taught me all of this, she showed me all of this, while bouncing around the countryside for about 3 or 4 years making essences. And I tell you, it was such a beautiful journey, and I encourage you all to do it. Because not only did I experience the healing of the essences, but this love and connection with nature that is so important. Nature so wants to be part of our healing process again. Flower essences are a beautiful way of doing that, for them to come into our lives and also for us to connect to them. This is all through teachings of Avelyn from Avelyn, and she's still with me. And working with her and working with spirits in this way, they help to evolve too. I hadn't quite grasped that. When you work with those spirits and they interact with you in such a detailed world, they evolve too, which I think is really a beautiful thing to say and to put that out there. I think that's important. So there I was, 3 to 4 years, making all these lovely essences, finding that I was getting more drawn away from this healing program that I was working with Jill with, and I ended up with this big box of essences. Now, I purposefully, guided by my cynic and skeptic about this work, purposely didn't read anything about any other essences, any other companies, any books, any cross-references, because I wanted to keep myself pure with my experience, so therefore when I did come to validate them, I would be validated or cuckoo, right? So I kept myself all away from that, but I ended up with this lovely box of flowers of about 28 essences. What do I do with this? So I started to then cross-reference, but in those days, in '99, internet was just getting started, there wasn't much information, and I was producing a completely different range of essences. Bush and Batch essences, Dr. Batch's remedies, are a massive market player, and all the variations of his. And so the marketplace and the information is saturated by all his information. But I was bringing out essences that weren't out there, or people weren't writing them in books or anything. So how do I know they work? In my practice, I'm a CranioSacral therapist. I work with animals and horses and babies, of course humans as well, adults as well. And I had my little box of all my lovely wildflowers. And in CranioSacral therapy, there is a fluctuating rhythm that we listen to and we feel. We say listen because it gives us a much broader aspect of understanding what it is that we're feeling or listening to. And it's a fluctuating rhythm that has a rate, an amplitude, a symmetry, and it seems to be generated, well, what we think it is, it's generated by cerebral spinal fluid. This is a fluid that the brain produces, and is an integral part of the nervous system. And it is sucked in by the nervous system and pushed out. So it creates a kind of a breath, a tide, or a craniosacral rhythm. This is so intrinsically linked to the subtle energy bodies that you can find out if somebody has a bad back, or things are tight, or things are stuck within that energy body by the character of the movement of this fluid. So I don't mean like I can tell you, but it literally is. That's why it's really good for babies and animals. It's because I can tell you what's going on with the client by the feedback of this fluid. Because it's so connected with the energy body itself, and flower essences are not only gifts and healing tools, but energy themselves. So when we have imbalances in the auric field, treat energy with like, so treat it with the essences. In that day, my client's body, this biofeedback mechanism that we use within craniosacral therapy, which Dr. Upledger, who is the father of CranioSacral therapy, calls the inner physician. It's like a biofeedback mechanism. I think like kinesiology and dowsing is all propelled by this same force. So you can get very clear yes-nos from the body to see where you work, what you want me to do, whether you want me to treat or whether you don't. Now, I've been doing that for years. Trust it wholeheartedly. That day, my client's inner physician or biofeedback mechanism said it wanted a particular flower, lesser celandine, kept on jumping into my head. So I said to my client on that day, I said, look, I don't know if you want to do this, but I've got a whole box of essences over there that they're not tested. But just trust me, they're non-toxic, they're okay, they're safe, you'll be all right. But could you take this essence because your body's really wanting it? And she said, fine. So she took the essence, and I didn't tell her what I thought it was good for. I didn't necessarily know why she needed it. But we were treating her for a chest infection that wasn't going. She tried everything. So something potentially was sitting on her chest, or she needed to get something off her chest. And that exactly was it. She came back a week later after taking lesser celandine, and she had needed to get something off her chest with her partner that she'd been holding so closely that the energy body had got stuck, sticky, coagulated. And she got this chest infection that hadn't moved. By the end of the week, it was shifting and getting better. So she'd had the confidence and courage and the focus of what was the medicine, the healing of lesser celandine, that she'd had that. She'd had that direct experience. So I'm sitting there, my cynic and skeptic are sitting there going, okay, you need to test this more. So 7 years in my practice, with permission, with the babies, animals, the horses I work on, and my clients, I discovered, I didn't tell them what the essences were good for. If the body needed them, I'd make up a combination or whatever for them, or just give them the single. They'd take them, they'd come back, and they basically tell me, with a few ifs and buts here and there, exactly what it was that I picked up when I made the essence. That then entered, so there was something going on there, right? There was something moving here. I trust that rhythm wholeheartedly. I see people coming in with bad backs and going out with not a bad back before the essence. So I trusted that process. So as I said, 7 years on that, 7 years trying these out, brought me into understanding how essences worked. Again, no formal training, but understanding through my work with Avelyn, the inner physician working through the cranial field, gave me this beautiful insight. Also, how flower essences work in combinations and how important it is for combination essences, bespoke essences, are for individuals, as opposed to generic pre-blends, which the market is saturated with. And I've got a few pre-blends myself, but the best is a personalized blend. Your stress and my stress is going to be different, but it's all stress. But let's make something up unique for you. That's what I realized through this 7 years. So at the end of 7 years, I'm like, right, I'm satisfied, but my skeptic and cynic sitting on my shoulder is like, yeah, but you just expect people to believe what it is that you believe? I'm like, okay, so what's out there? Come on, universe, show me, find me, anything to test these guys out and to keep these guys quiet, right? Or at least entertain them. I don't know if they ever quieten down, really. They do shut up sometimes. But anyway, I went down that process. And my first experience of trying to test the validity of the essences were Kirlian photography. I don't know if you know about Kirlian photography, but it's very simple in its process, and it's probably the most effective way of looking at energy medicine. And you're basically getting a very thin metal plate, and underneath the metal plate you put a photographic paper, and then you emit certain levels of electricity through the metal plate. Now electricity, interesting, electricity is always trying to ground itself. This man-made thing trying to get back to the earth. Anyway, that's another subject. But so if you place something onto the plate, say if it's a bottle, the bottle itself will have a certain conductivity to it and a resistance to the electricity. So if it's low conductivity, it will then absorb more of the electricity. If it's stronger, it will repel the electricity from it. Now, the really cool thing, and I'd really encourage you to have a look online, Kirlian photography, is that as the electricity goes through the paper, it then takes a sort of energetic fingerprint of the, let's say, the bottle itself. And if there is a strong conductivity to it and it repels it, you get these beautiful, like lightning streaks coming off it, all on the photographic paper. So if we, at one of the trade shows I was on, I met this guy and we did some testing, as scientific as we could, right, with what we're working with energy and subtle medicine. He was as keen to get it as clear as I was. And so we got a few people, I didn't know their background, and we used their hands as the visual aid to see how much the essences would help the person or not. So they put the hands on the plate, on the metal plate, get the certain level of electricity on there, and particularly this one person had a very low energy. So the lower the energy, so if they're not well, if they're depressed or things like that, they'll absorb more of the electricity. There was hardly a corona of the hand itself, hardly at all an energetic imprint, because she was very weak. I didn't know that at the time. She then took nettle essence with clear quartz because of the mineral as well as the flower, and we then tested her 10 seconds later, and there was a significant improvement in the resistance of her body, and you could see it because there was more corona in the photograph. She then took that essence, nettle and clear quartz, for the week that we then tested her again, and it had sustained and built on the resistance to now it had becoming much more regular. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but she was depressed, this young girl, and her energies were very low, and she had ME and things like that. And what nettle is really good for is fortifying, strengthening the auric field. Clear quartz is really good for strengthening, cleansing the auric field. And so again, this information, hopefully this clarity and clarification of the essences that we're making, now starting to see at least a change in what's happening with the energy field. Okay, that, you know, because we're working with essences and their subtle energy, we don't yet have the apparatus to show its efficacy and actually how it works, but we can see change. So it was Kirlian photography, and we did a whole lot of other tests and different things, which that's another subject, and very fascinating that, you know, what came up, and in short, less really is more. You know, the less essence we put into the tincture that people were taking, the stronger the effect. So I moved on from Kirlian photography. What else was out there? Aura photography or chakra photography, and this is working with meridians, and they would hold a ball that was connected to a computer, which had a program that allowed you to see the fluctuating difference of the chakras, which are parts of the subtle energy field. There are 7 of them. There are more, but traditionally there are 7. The auric field itself, and stress levels and different things like that. So this whole program was able to do that. So I did a lot of work with these guys. I took them to shows, and again, I'm not 100% sure how that technology works, but we saw change. So great, okay, so we've got this visual aspect now. Anything else out there? Come on, chucking it out to the universe. Give me some more things to test this stuff. And at the time, Dr. Emoto, Messages from Water, a Japanese research scientist with water, exposing water to certain elements, or taking different spring waters, freezing it, and then seeing how it froze and the crystalline structure. And so therefore water is a very magical part of what we do, and we believe that water holds memory. We'll look at that in more depth later. But he was allowing people to send him essences, and then he'll put that in the water, and then he'll freeze that. And that opened up an amazing, opened up a bit of a can of worms actually in that process. But what came back, and the crystals that came back, were I used white archangel, which is a dead nettle, and this lovely little face came out of this beautiful crystal, like it had wings. Whether we can replicate that again or not, it doesn't matter. But the point is, I was trying to work with my cynic and skeptic to make sure that what I was doing, that I wasn't peddling placebo, and that what I was doing was actually not making this stuff up, and finding that this communication and this gift from nature itself can actually help heal the body. Right, so armed with that stuff, I said, I got to take this to market. So I put it into bottles and labels, and printed up pamphlets and tried to communicate this stuff in a digestible way. And I had the great, I was introduced to a lady called Claire Harvey. Claire Harvey, and before internet came and the web, you'd have people like Claire Harvey, Don Dennis, who were not producers, but promoters of essences. So you would get big warehouses full of huge amounts of international essences from all the way around the world, stockpiled this stuff. Then if you wanted them, you'd go to them. Now the onset of internet, everybody goes straight to the producer. But Claire Harvey was very much one of those, the backbone of bringing essences into the UK. And I had this great opportunity of meeting her. So I sort of kept pushing at her, kept knocking on her door, kept phoning her. And she went, okay, bring what you've got. So she was at a trade show at the time. I presented what I had. She went, great, this is great. Okay, you've got something new here. English wildflower essences. Okay, is anyone presenting them as that? No, you've got to rebrand what I've just spent hundreds of pounds on and make it more commercial, and she'd help me with that. So we rebranded, redid the website, and that was a whole other journey, working with designers and printers, the language that one has to learn to deal with those, work with those guys, and the fonts. Have you ever worked with fonts? I mean, it was an incredible journey. I was still out in the woods with the flowers, and now I'm working on this different front, but she did help me. And I then got affiliated with an association called BAFEP, British Association of Flower Essence Producers. So all my standards, the way I communicated, my labeling, all became under their umbrella. I thought that was really important to communicate the professional side of what it is that I want to do with this, with these essences. And then I took them to market. So mind, body, spirit shows, complementary alternative shows, holistic fairs. I even went to Houston to the biggest herbal fest in America. Any stage, any chance to do a performance, perform a presentation with these things, I was there to do that. In the shows themselves, I started to use, in the presentations before I got to the shows, as I said, I'm not a botanist, so for me to understand the flowers that I was taking, and I have got a couple wrong, that's why I've gone into photography. A love of mine, and macro photography, is taking pictures of the plant, so therefore not only the love of it, but to understand that I've made sure I've got the right plant. But when I do the presentations, I would bring out sort of bigger versions of the flower pictures that I took. And what I found was that people were drawn to the flowers that they needed from these big flower cards. So it was as if the flowers themselves, through the cards, became this medium and was communicating via this thing. So I was like, hang on, I've got loads and loads of flowers. Cards, everyone's doing cards, right? Tarot cards, angel cards. I wonder if I could make a deck of flower cards. It's not it's not to tell the future. It's not to give you insight of the past, but to maybe create an oracle out of these flowers that people could use the cards as a way of divining, like an intuition, to allow intuition to come into that process, to create bespoke essences like I found in my practice. So at these trade shows, I developed this kit called the Wildflower Oracle Kit, and in there we've got the 28 essences, 28 flower cards, labels that I can make up personalized bespoke essences, and I started doing readings. Again, this is all experimental. I didn't know what was going to happen. And again, firstly, confirmation back of what the person asking the question for what they needed essences for, that they were attracted to the appropriate essences for them and making up combinations. But, and in some stages quite startling, was that it cut straight to the chase. There was no talking in and around the things that you wanted healing, but not really talking about the thing that you really need to heal. Sometimes the things that we really know, sometimes the things that we want to really heal, we don't actually know what it is because it's so close to us. It's like underneath our nose. So that process and the intuitive process, using those cards, in that at that time, showed me that a veil is lifted, and it can bring some quite stark feedback from the choice and the message from the flowers. Wildflower Essences isn't about taking you away from your issues. That's old school. That's old school. You need to go to the issue. If there's a hole in your life, don't build a bridge over it or around it, jump in it. Jump in that hole. You've got to heal that hole. And what Wildflower Essences has taught me is that we'll be there with you. We'll help you with that. We'll hold your hand to do that. Because the neurological bundle that is created from that hole, per se, in our lives, in our energy field, it needs healing. And I got this all from working with essences. And so as we used the cards and we saw that the veil was lifted, you know, it was a stark realization about what the person needed to do to heal. And if they wanted to, then we'd make up an essence. We'd then tune in and find out how long they would need it for, how many drops. So it was very fine-tuned. And there they were. That's some flower support to help people through that healing process. So that's where I'm at today with it. I'm learning lots, and I'm still making essences. I'm moving into orchid essences, which is a whole nother frontier, working with English wildflower orchids. And I'm here today to go into more detail about how to make essences, the processes, the magic of water, and I hope you enjoy this journey.